Harold Martinez stood on the cold sidewalk outside the fancy restaurant. His old brown jacket was clean but had many small holes. His gray hair was neat, but his face looked tired. He had not eaten for 2 days. His stomach hurt from being so empty. The restaurant was called Le Bernardin. It was one of the most expensive places to eat in Chicago. Rich people came here every night. They wore nice clothes and drove big cars. They spent more money on one dinner than Harold had seen in months. Harold watched the people walk in and out. They all looked happy and full. They laughed loudly and talked about their big houses and fancy trips. Harold remembered when he used to be like them, but that was a long time ago. Now he was just an old man with no money and no home. He had been walking around the city for 3 hours. He had asked 12 people for help. Some people ignored him. Others said mean things. A few people gave him dirty looks and walked away fast. Harold was not asking for money. He only wanted a chance to work for food. Harold saw a tall man getting out of a shiny black car. The man wore an expensive suit and a gold watch. He had perfect hair and white teeth. This was Marcus Wellington. Harold had seen his picture in the newspaper. Marcus owned a big computer company. He was worth millions of dollars. Harold took a deep breath. His hand shook a little. He walked slowly toward Marcus. His old shoes made quiet sounds on the sidewalk. "Excuse me, sir," Harold said in a soft voice. Marcus was talking on his phone. He held up one finger to tell Harold to wait. Harold stood there quietly. He could hear Marcus talking about buying another house. After 2 minutes, Marcus finished his phone call. He looked at Harold with an annoyed face. "What do you want, old man?" Marcus asked. "I don't give money to people on the street." "I don't want money, sir," Harold said. "I was wondering if I could play piano for a meal. I haven't eaten in 2 days. I can play music. I just need some food." Marcus stared at Harold for a moment. Then he started laughing. It was not a kind laugh. It was the kind of laugh that made other people feel small. "You want to play piano?" Marcus said loudly. "Look at yourself. You're just a homeless old man. What could you possibly know about piano?" Other people walking by started to look. They heard Marcus laughing and wanted to see what was funny. Harold felt his face get hot with shame, but he did not walk away. "I have been playing piano for many years, sir," Harold said quietly. "I just need a chance to show you." Marcus laughed even louder. "This is the funniest thing I've heard all week. Hey, everyone, this old guy thinks he can play piano." More people gathered around. Some of them were coming out of the restaurant. Others were just walking by on the street. They all wanted to see what was happening. "Please, sir," Harold said. "I'm not asking for charity. I want to work for my food. I can play any song you want, any song," Marcus said with a big smile. "You hear that, folks? This man can play any song." The crowd was getting bigger. Some people felt sorry for Harold. Others thought it was funny, like Marcus did. A few people took out their phones to record what was happening. Harold stood very still. He kept his hands folded in front of him. His back was straight even though he was tired and hungry. There was something in his eyes that Marcus could not understand. It was not fear or shame. It was something else. Something calm and sure. "I don't want to cause trouble," Harold said. "I just want to work for a meal. If you have a piano inside, I can show you." Marcus looked at the crowd around them. Everyone was watching him. He liked being the center of attention. He liked feeling important and powerful. "You know what?" Marcus said loudly. "This is going to be fun. Let's go inside and see what this old man can do." Marcus walked toward the restaurant door. The crowd followed him. Harold walked behind them all. He moved slowly because he was weak from not eating. Inside the restaurant, everything was beautiful. The tables had white cloth and real flowers. The walls had expensive paintings. Soft music played from hidden speakers. The smell of good food filled the air. The restaurant manager saw the crowd coming in. He looked worried. This was not normal for his quiet, fancy restaurant. "Mr. Wellington," the manager said. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is perfect," Marcus said. "This gentleman wants to play piano for food. You have that old piano in the corner, right?" The manager looked at Harold. He saw an old man in worn clothes who looked very tired. The manager felt sorry for him, but he also worried about his restaurant. "Sir, I'm not sure that's a good idea," the manager said quietly. "Come on," Marcus said. "It will be entertaining. Let the old man try. When he fails, we'll all have a good laugh." Harold listened to them talk about him like he was not there. He had heard this kind of talk many times in the past few months. People acted like poor people could not hear or understand. The piano sat in the corner of the restaurant. It was old and had not been played in a long time. Dust covered the top. It was only there to look nice, not for real music. Marcus pointed at the piano. "There you go, old man. Show us what you can do." Harold walked slowly to the piano. His legs felt weak, but he did not let it show. The crowd followed him. Everyone was talking and laughing. Some people felt bad for Harold, but they did not say anything. Harold looked at the piano bench. It was the same kind he had sat on thousands of times before. But those times seemed like they happened to a different person, a person who had a home and a family and enough food to eat. He pulled out the bench and sat down. The crowd got quiet for a moment. They wanted to see what would happen next. Harold placed his hands on the keys. They were the same hands that had once played for thousands of people. The same hands that had made beautiful music for over 50 years. But now they were older and had small shakes from being hungry. He looked up at Marcus. Marcus was smiling and waiting for Harold to embarrass himself. The other people in the crowd were waiting too. Some had their phones ready to record. Harold took a deep breath. He thought about his wife, Elena. He thought about all the beautiful music they had shared together. He thought about why music was important even when everything else was gone. Then Harold began to play. Marcus felt very pleased with himself. He had an audience now, and he loved being the center of attention. The restaurant was full of well-dressed people who had stopped eating to watch what was happening. Some had come from other tables. Others had just walked in from the street. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said in a loud voice, "we have entertainment tonight. This fine gentleman believes he can play piano well enough to earn a meal." Marcus walked around like he was putting on a show. He waved his hands and smiled at the crowd. Some people laughed with him. Others looked uncomfortable but did not say anything. "Now I want everyone to get their phones ready," Marcus continued. "This is going to be something special. We're about to see what happens when someone reaches too high." Harold sat quietly at the piano bench. He could hear everything Marcus was saying, but he did not react. His hands rested gently on his knees. He looked at the piano keys like he was seeing old friends. A woman in a red dress whispered to her husband, "This is cruel. We should stop this." Her husband shook his head. "Don't get involved. Marcus Wellington is too powerful. We don't want to make him angry." The restaurant manager stood near the kitchen door. He felt torn between wanting to help Harold and needing to keep his important customers happy. Marcus spent a lot of money at the restaurant. He brought other rich friends too. The manager could not afford to lose that business. "Should I call security?" a waiter asked the manager quietly. "Not yet," the manager whispered back. "Let's see what happens." Marcus pulled out his own phone and started recording. "This is going to be perfect for social media," he said to his friends. "Homeless man thinks he's a concert pianist. This will get 1 million views." Harold finally looked up from the piano. His eyes were calm and sad, but not angry. He had learned that getting angry at cruel people only made things worse. It was better to stay quiet and dignified. "What are you going to play for us?" Marcus asked in a mocking voice. "Do you know chopsticks? That might be more your level." The crowd laughed at Marcus's joke. Harold did not answer the question. Instead, he asked quietly, "Is the piano tuned?" This made Marcus laugh even harder. "Is the piano tuned?" "Listen to this guy. He's worried about the piano being tuned." "Most restaurant pianos are not tuned well," Harold explained patiently. "They are mostly for decoration. But I can work with whatever sound it makes." A young man in the crowd filmed Harold with his phone. He was planning to post it online with a funny caption. He had already thought of several mean jokes about old people who thought they had talent. A teenage girl stood next to her parents. She felt sorry for Harold but did not know what to do. "Mom," she whispered, "this doesn't feel right." "Shh," her mother said. "Don't make a scene." Marcus walked closer to Harold. "Okay, old man. You get 5 minutes. 5 minutes to show us your amazing talent. Then security will escort you out." Marcus looked around the restaurant for the security guard. The guard was a big man named Frank who usually stood quietly by the door. Frank did not like what was happening, but it was not his job to question the customers. "Are you ready, maestro?" Marcus asked with a fake bow. Harold nodded once. He turned back to the piano and placed his fingers on the keys. The keys felt familiar under his touch even though this piano was old and not very good. "Wait," Marcus said suddenly. Before you start, let's make this more interesting. Harold looked up again. If you can actually play something impressive, Marcus said, I'll buy you dinner. The most expensive thing on the menu, the crowd murmured with interest. This sounded like a fair bet. But, Marcus continued with a sly smile, if you embarrass yourself, you have to leave immediately, and you can never come back to this part of the city again. Harold thought about this. He was very hungry and he had nowhere else to go. But he also knew something that Marcus did not know. He knew exactly what his hands could do, even after all these months of hardship. That sounds fair, Harold said quietly. Marcus clapped his hands together. Excellent. Everyone heard the deal. If he fails, he leaves forever. The restaurant became completely quiet. Even the kitchen staff had stopped cooking to listen. Waiters stood still with plates in their hands. The soft background music had been turned off. Harold closed his eyes for a moment. He thought about Elena, his wife who had died 6 months ago. She had always loved it when he played Chopin. She said Chopin understood sadness but also hope. Harold opened his eyes and looked at the keys. His hands moved to the starting position. The crowd leaned forward to see better. Marcus held his phone up to record everything. This is it, folks, Marcus whispered to his phone camera. The moment of truth. Harold's fingers touched the keys and the first note rang out clear and pure. It was not the fumbling sound everyone expected. It was the sound of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The note hung in the air for a moment. Then Harold played the second note and the third. He was playing Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. It was one of the most difficult pieces ever written for piano. The change in the room was immediate. The laughter stopped. The whispered jokes stopped. Even Marcus stopped smiling. Harold's hands moved across the keys like they belonged there. Every note was perfect. Every phrase was shaped with the skill of someone who had spent a lifetime learning this music. A woman near the front gasped quietly. She recognized the piece. She had studied piano in college and knew how hard this music was to play. The young man who had been filming for a joke slowly lowered his phone. He was not laughing anymore. Marcus stood frozen with his mouth open. This was not what he had expected at all. This old homeless man was playing like a professional musician. Harold's face had changed too. The tired, hungry look was gone. He looked like a different person now. He looked like the master musician he had always been, even when the world forgot. The music filled every corner of the restaurant. It was sad and beautiful and perfect. It told a story of loss and pain, but also of strength and dignity. People in the crowd began to realize they were hearing something extraordinary. This was not just good playing. This was the kind of playing they would pay to hear in a concert hall. Marcus felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt small and foolish. He felt like he had made a terrible mistake. But Harold was not finished yet. He was just getting started. The restaurant had become completely silent except for the piano music. Harold's fingers moved across the keys with impossible grace. Each note was perfect, clear, and filled with emotion. This was not the playing of an amateur. This was the work of a true master. Marcus stood with his phone still recording, but he had forgotten why he was filming. His mouth was open in surprise. The mocking smile had disappeared from his face completely. He watched Harold's hands move and could not believe what he was seeing. The Chopin piece flowed like water. Harold played the gentle parts so softly that people had to hold their breath to hear them. Then came the powerful parts that made the old piano ring with sound. Even though the piano was not perfect, Harold made it sing like a fine instrument. A woman in a blue dress had tears in her eyes. She had not expected to hear such beautiful music tonight. She had come to the restaurant for a simple dinner with her husband. Now she was witnessing something magical. The teenage girl who had felt sorry for Harold was staring with wide eyes. She took piano lessons at school, but she had never heard anything like this. Her teacher always talked about real musicians, but she had never understood what that meant. Now she knew. The restaurant manager stood by the kitchen door with his mouth open. In 20 years of running this restaurant, he had never seen anything like this. The old piano in the corner had always been just decoration. Now it sounded like it belonged in Carnegie Hall. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working. Cooks and dishwashers stood in the doorway listening to the music. One old cook had tears running down his face. The music reminded him of his grandmother, who used to play piano when he was small. Harold's eyes were closed now. He was lost in the music, remembering all the times he had played this piece before. He remembered playing it for Elena on their anniversary. He remembered playing it in concert halls full of people. He remembered teaching it to his best students. But most of all, he remembered why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. Music could take away pain. Music could make people feel less alone. Music could turn a room full of strangers into a family, even if just for a few minutes. The Chopin piece came to an end with a series of soft, gentle notes. The last note hung in the air like a prayer. Then there was complete silence. Harold sat very still at the piano bench. His hands rested on his knees again. He looked tired but also peaceful. Playing music always made him feel better, even when everything else in his life was falling apart. The silence stretched for 10 seconds, 20 seconds. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They were all still caught up in the beauty of what they had just heard. Then Harold placed his hands on the keys again. Without saying anything, he began to play another piece. This time it was Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. This piece was even harder than the Chopin. It was written for piano and orchestra, but Harold played both parts himself. The music was different now. Where Chopin had been gentle and sad, Rachmaninoff was powerful and dramatic. Harold's left hand played the deep orchestra parts while his right hand played the solo piano melody. Sometimes both hands worked together to create sounds that seemed to come from more than one piano. A man in the crowd whispered to his wife, "This is impossible. How is he doing this?" His wife shook her head in amazement. "I don't know, but it's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Marcus felt like the ground was moving under his feet. Everything he thought he knew about this old man was wrong. This was not a homeless person looking for charity. This was one of the finest musicians he had ever heard. Marcus looked around the restaurant. Every single person was staring at Harold in amazement. The phones that had been recording to make fun of him were now recording to capture something precious. A well-dressed woman near Marcus was crying openly. "I haven't heard Rachmaninoff played like this since I was at the symphony last year," she whispered to her friend. "But this is even better. You can feel every emotion." Harold's playing became even more powerful. His whole body moved with the music now. His shoulders swayed gently. His head tilted with the phrases. He was no longer just an old man at a restaurant piano. He was a great artist sharing his gift with the world. The music built to a climax that made everyone in the room hold their breath. Harold's hands flew across the keys, playing notes so fast they seemed to blur together. Yet every single note was crystal clear and perfectly placed. A young man who had been filming to post something funny on social media slowly put his phone away. He realized that making fun of this would be like making fun of something sacred. The restaurant manager made a quick decision. He walked quietly to the front door and locked it. Then he put up a sign that said "Private Event." He did not want anyone to interrupt this performance. Harold played the beautiful slow section of the Rachmaninoff with such tenderness that several people started crying. The melody seemed to speak directly to their hearts. It talked about love and loss and hope and dreams. An old woman in the corner thought about her husband who had died the year before. The music reminded her of their first dance at their wedding. She had not thought about that happy memory in months. A young father thought about his daughter who was far away at college. The music made him remember teaching her to ride a bicycle and reading her bedtime stories. Even Marcus found himself thinking about things he had forgotten. He remembered his grandmother who had tried to teach him piano when he was young. He had been too busy and impatient to learn. Now he wished he had listened to her. Harold moved into the final section of the piece. The music became triumphant and joyful, like the sun breaking through storm clouds. His hands danced across the keys, creating sounds that filled every corner of the restaurant with beauty. When the piece ended, the silence was even deeper than before. Nobody wanted to break the spell. They all knew they had just experienced something they would remember for the rest of their lives. Harold opened his eyes and looked at his hands. They were the same old hands that had been shaking with hunger an hour ago. But when they touched the piano keys, they became young again. They became powerful again. He turned around on the piano bench and looked at the crowd. Every face was staring at him with wonder and respect. These were the same people who had been laughing at him just minutes before. Marcus stood in the front of the crowd, his face pale with shock. He realized that he had made one of the biggest mistakes of his life. He had judged this man without knowing anything about him. He had tried to humiliate someone who turned out to be far more talented than Marcus could ever dream of being. Harold stood up slowly from the piano bench. His legs were still weak from hunger, but his spirit was strong. Music had always given him strength even in his darkest moments. "Thank you for listening," Harold said quietly to the crowd. Then the applause began. The applause started slowly. One person began clapping, then another, then another. Within seconds, everyone in the restaurant was clapping as hard as they could. The sound filled the room like thunder. People were not just clapping. They were standing up. They were cheering. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. Others were shaking their heads in amazement, still not believing what they had just heard. "Bravo!" called out an older man who clearly knew good music when he heard it. "Magnificent. Absolutely magnificent." The teenage girl was clapping so hard her hands hurt. She turned to her parents with excitement. "Did you hear that? Did you hear how he played? I want to learn to play like that." Her father nodded, looking ashamed of himself. Just minutes ago, he had been watching Harold with amusement, expecting him to fail. Now he realized he had been in the presence of greatness. The restaurant manager was clapping too, but he was also thinking fast. He walked quickly to Harold and took his arm gently. "Sir," the manager said quietly, "would you please allow us to provide you with our finest meal? It would be an honor to serve you." Harold looked surprised. "I only asked to work for food," he said. "I played the music. I earned a simple meal." "Sir, what you just did was worth far more than any meal we could serve," the manager replied. "Please let us show you proper respect." A woman in an expensive dress walked up to Harold. She was crying, but they were happy tears. "I have to tell you," she said, "I teach music at the university. I've heard some of the world's best pianists. You play like someone who has spent their whole life devoted to music." Harold smiled gently. "Music has been my life," he said simply. The woman pressed a $20 bill into Harold's hand. "Please take this. Not because you need charity, but because what you just gave us was priceless." Harold tried to give the money back. "Ma'am, I only wanted to play for food." "I don't need—" "Keep it," she insisted. "You earned it 100 times over." More people came forward. A businessman offered $50. A young couple wanted to give Harold their credit card to buy whatever he needed. An old woman pressed Harold's hands between hers and said, "Thank you for reminding me why music matters." Harold accepted their thanks gracefully, but he would only take enough money for a simple meal. He gently refused everything else. "Please," he said to each person, "your appreciation is enough. I played because music is meant to be shared, not because I wanted to get rich." Marcus stood in the back of the crowd, watching everything happen. He felt sick to his stomach. Half an hour ago, he had been laughing at this man. He had tried to humiliate Harold in front of all these people. Now those same people were treating Harold like a hero. Because that's what he was. Harold was someone who had lost everything but still had the grace to share his gift with others. Marcus thought about all the money he had spent on things that didn't matter. Expensive cars, fancy watches, huge houses he didn't need. Meanwhile, this man who could create such beauty was going hungry. A young man with a phone walked up to Harold. "Sir, I recorded your performance. Would it be okay if I shared it online? I think the whole world should hear your music." Harold thought about this. "If it might help other people appreciate classical music, then yes," he said. "But please don't use my name. The music is what matters, not who played it." The young man nodded. He had originally planned to post the video to make fun of Harold. Now he wanted to share it because it was the most beautiful thing he had ever captured on camera. A little girl who had been eating dinner with her family walked up to Harold. She was only about 8 years old. "Mister," she said in a small voice, "that was the prettiest music I ever heard. It made me feel happy and sad at the same time." Harold knelt down so he could look into the little girl's eyes. "That's exactly what good music should do," he told her. "It should make you feel things you didn't know you could feel. Could you teach me to play like that?" The girl asked. Harold's eyes sparkled. "Music is the best teacher," he said. "If you listen carefully and practice with love, the music will teach you everything you need to know." The girl's parents watched this conversation with amazement. They had never seen their daughter so interested in anything before. A professor of classical music had been eating dinner at a corner table. He walked over to Harold with a serious expression. "Sir," the professor said, "I need to ask you something. Where did you study? Who were your teachers?" I've been around classical music for 30 years and I've rarely heard technique like yours. Harold straightened up from talking to the little girl. I went to Juilliard, he said quietly. I studied with some wonderful teachers there. The professor's eyes widened. Juilliard was one of the most famous music schools in the world. Only the most talented musicians got to study there. What did you do after Juilliard? The professor asked. I played with orchestras, Harold said. I taught music. I tried to serve the art that had given me so much. The professor nodded with deep respect. He realized he was talking to someone who had dedicated their entire life to music. Someone who understood it at the deepest level. Marcus finally found the courage to walk forward. His legs felt shaky and his mouth was dry. He had to apologize, but he didn't know how to begin. Sir, Marcus said when he reached Harold. His voice was quiet and humble. I owe you an apology. A huge apology. Harold turned to look at Marcus. There was no anger in his eyes, just patience. I was wrong about you, Marcus continued. I was wrong about everything. I judged you without knowing anything about who you really are. Harold listened without saying anything. He had learned that sometimes people needed to say sorry more than they needed to be forgiven. I've been thinking about this while you played, Marcus said. I spend my money on stupid things. Cars and watches and gadgets. But you can create something that touches people's souls. You have a gift that's worth more than anything I own. Marcus looked around the restaurant. Everyone was still buzzing with excitement about the music they had heard. How can I make this right? Marcus asked. What can I do to fix what I did to you? Harold smiled gently. You already have, he said. You gave me a chance to play music for people who appreciated it. That's all any musician really wants. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with that answer. He knew that Harold was still hungry, still homeless, still facing the same problems he had before he sat down at the piano. No, Marcus said firmly. That's not enough. You shouldn't be on the street. Someone with your talent should never have to worry about food or shelter. Harold looked at Marcus with surprise. This was a very different man from the one who had been laughing at him just an hour ago. Mr. Wellington, the restaurant manager called out. Your table is ready whenever you'd like. Marcus looked at the manager, then back at Harold. Would you join me for dinner? He asked. I'd like to hear more about your music, and I'd like to learn how someone like me can do better. Harold considered this invitation. He was still very hungry, and Marcus seemed sincere about wanting to make amends. I would be honored, Harold said. As they walked to the table together, the whole restaurant watched them. The old homeless man and the rich businessman, sitting down to share a meal. It was not something anyone had expected to see when the evening began, but then again, nobody had expected to hear music that would change their hearts either. Marcus and Harold sat across from each other at the best table in the restaurant. The white tablecloth was perfect, and fresh flowers sat between them. But Marcus could barely look at the luxury around him. Everything felt different now. The waiter brought menus, but Marcus pushed his aside. Please bring us your finest meal, he told the waiter. Whatever the chef recommends. And make sure there's plenty of it. Harold picked up his menu and looked at the prices. Even the cheapest dish cost more than he had seen in months. Mr. Wellington, this is very kind, but something simple would be fine. Please, Marcus said. Call me Marcus. And nothing is too good for you. After what you just did, you could ask for anything in this restaurant. Harold set down the menu. I only wanted to play music, he said quietly. I never expected all of this attention. Marcus leaned forward. That's what I don't understand. How are you here? How is someone with your incredible talent asking for food on the street? Harold was quiet for a moment. He had not told his story to anyone in months. It was too painful, and most people wouldn't believe it anyway. It's a long story, Harold said finally. I have all night, Marcus replied, and I think I need to hear it. The waiter brought them both water and some fresh bread. Harold ate a small piece slowly. He had not tasted good bread in so long that it seemed like the most wonderful thing in the world. My name is Harold Martinez, he began. I was principal pianist for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra for 32 years. Marcus almost choked on his water. The Chicago Symphony was one of the most famous orchestras in America. Being the principal pianist meant Harold had been one of the most important musicians in the entire city. 32 years? Marcus asked in amazement. Harold nodded. I also taught at the music conservatory and gave private lessons. I had a good life. A wonderful life, actually. What happened? Marcus asked gently. Harold looked out the window for a moment. I was married to the most wonderful woman in the world. Her name was Elena. She was a violinist. We met when we were both very young, studying music. Harold's voice became softer when he talked about Elena. Marcus could hear the love in every word. Elena and I played together for 45 years. She was my partner in music and in life. We never had children, but we had each other and we had music. That felt like enough. Harold paused to eat another piece of bread. Marcus waited patiently. About 3 years ago, Elena started forgetting things, Harold continued. Small things at first. Where she put her violin bow, what day it was. Then bigger things. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He was starting to understand where the story was going. The doctor said it was Alzheimer's disease, Harold said. Elena's beautiful mind, the mind that could remember every piece of music she had ever played, was slowly disappearing. Harold's hands shook slightly as he reached for his water glass. Marcus could see that talking about this was very difficult. I took care of her at home for as long as I could, Harold said, but the disease got worse. She needed constant care, special doctors, expensive treatments. Didn't you have insurance? Marcus asked. Harold smiled sadly. Musicians don't always have the best insurance. And even with insurance, Alzheimer's care is very expensive. The good care, the kind Elena deserved, cost more than we had. Harold looked directly at Marcus. I sold our house first. Then our car. Then my piano. Then everything else we owned. Marcus felt sick. You sold your piano? It was a beautiful Steinway grand piano, Harold said. Elena and I had saved for years to buy it. But when Elena needed help, the piano didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except taking care of her. The waiter brought their dinner. It was beautifully prepared fish with vegetables and sauce. Harold looked at it like he couldn't believe such food existed. Please eat, Marcus said. You need your strength. Harold took a small bite. The flavors were incredible after days of not eating. But he continued his story. I spent all of our savings on Elena's care, he said. I used up our retirement money. I borrowed against my pension. I did everything I could to make sure she had the best doctors and the best treatment. How long did you take care of her? Marcus asked. 2.5 years, Harold replied. They were the hardest years of my life, but also precious. Even when Elena forgot my name, she still remembered music. I would play for her, and for a few minutes she would come back to me. Harold's eyes filled with tears, but he kept eating and talking. Elena died 6 months ago, he said quietly. Peacefully in the care facility. I was holding her hand. Marcus felt tears in his own eyes. I'm so sorry. When Elena died, I had nothing left, Harold continued. No money, no house, no possessions. The funeral took my last few $100s. I was 73 years old with no way to start over. But surely someone would hire you to teach music? Marcus asked. Harold shook his head. I tried, but most music schools want younger teachers. Private students want teachers who have their own pianos and studios. I had nothing to offer except my knowledge. Marcus was beginning to understand the full tragedy of Harold's situation. My arthritis makes it hard to play for long periods, Harold explained. I can still play beautifully, as you heard tonight, but I can't practice for hours every day like I used to, so getting work as a performer is difficult too. What about family? Friends? Marcus asked. Elena and I never had children, Harold said. Our musician friends are all struggling too, or they've forgotten about us. When you're poor, people stop seeing you. They stop calling. Marcus thought about his own life. He had dozens of acquaintances who called themselves friends, but how many of them would help him if he lost everything? So for 6 months I've been living in my old car, Harold said. I park behind the music store where I used to teach lessons. The owner lets me use the bathroom and sometimes gives me work cleaning the store. That's why you asked to play for food, Marcus realized. I don't like to beg, Harold said with dignity, but I thought if I could show people what I could do, maybe they would see value in it. Music has always been how I earned my way in the world. Marcus pushed his expensive food around his plate. He had lost his appetite completely. Here was a man who had devoted his entire life to creating beauty, and the world had abandoned him when he needed help most. Harold, Marcus said quietly. I feel ashamed. Harold looked up from his meal. Why? Because I have so much and I've never created anything beautiful in my life, Marcus said. I've made money, but I've never made music. I've bought expensive things, but I've never given people the gift you gave us tonight. Marcus thought about his huge house that he barely lived in, his collection of cars he rarely drove, his bank accounts that kept growing while he looked for more ways to make money. "You've created something precious with your life," Marcus continued, "and I almost threw you out on the street without even giving you a chance." "You didn't know," Harold said gently. "But I should have," Marcus replied. "I should have seen that you were a person with dignity and worth regardless of how you looked or what you owned." Marcus made a decision. It was perhaps the most important decision he had ever made. "Harold, I want to help you," he said. "Not out of pity, but because the world needs your music. And because I need to learn from you." Harold looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean I want to offer you a job," Marcus said. "A real job with a real salary and a place to live. I want you to help me create something meaningful with my money." Harold set down his fork and stared at Marcus. "What kind of job?" Marcus smiled for the first time all evening. "I want to start a music foundation. A place where talented young people can learn from masters like you, and I want you to run it." For the first time since Elena died, Harold felt something he had almost forgotten. He felt hope. Harold stared at Marcus for a long moment. The offer seemed too good to be true. After months of sleeping in his car and wondering where his next meal would come from, the idea of having a job and a home felt like a dream. "You don't even know me," Harold said carefully. "How can you offer me such an important position?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. "After hearing you play tonight, I know the most important thing about you. I know you're a master musician. Everything else we can figure out. But running a foundation is more than just playing music," Harold said. "There would be business decisions, budgets, hiring people. I've never done anything like that." "I can handle the business side," Marcus replied. "What I can't do is recognize musical talent. I can't teach young people how to truly play. I can't inspire them the way you inspired everyone in this restaurant tonight." Harold took another bite of his dinner while he thought. The food was delicious, but his mind was racing. Could this really be happening? "Tell me more about your musical background," Marcus said. "I want to understand who you really are." Harold smiled slightly. It had been a long time since anyone had asked about his career with genuine interest. "I was born in a small town in Mexico," Harold began. "My father worked in the fields and my mother cleaned houses. We were very poor, but my mother loved music." Harold's eyes grew distant as he remembered. "When I was 5 years old, my mother found an old broken piano at the church. The priest said we could have it if we could fix it and move it ourselves." "Did you fix it?" Marcus asked. "My father and some neighbors helped us move it to our tiny house," Harold said. "Then my mother and I spent weeks learning how to tune it and repair the broken keys. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." Harold paused to drink some water. "My mother taught me the few songs she knew. But I wanted to learn more. I would listen to classical music on an old radio and try to play what I heard." "How did you get formal training?" Marcus asked. "When I was 12, a music teacher from the city heard me playing at a church service," Harold explained. "She said I had talent and offered to teach me for free if my parents would let me come to the city every Saturday." Marcus could picture young Harold making that long trip every week just to learn music. "My parents didn't understand classical music," Harold continued, "but they could see how much it meant to me. My father worked extra hours to pay for my bus fare to the city." Harold smiled at the memory. "I would leave home before sunrise on Saturday morning and not get back until late at night. But those lessons were the most important day of my week." "How did you get to Juilliard?" Marcus asked. "My teacher entered me in a competition when I was 17, Harold said. "I won first place and a scholarship to study in New York. I had never been more than 50 miles from home. But suddenly I was moving to the biggest city in America." Marcus tried to imagine how overwhelming that must have been for a young man from a small Mexican town. Juilliard was terrifying at first, Harold admitted. The other students had been taking lessons their whole lives. They had expensive instruments and fancy clothes. I had one good shirt and a used piano book. "But you succeeded," Marcus said. "I worked harder than anyone else," Harold replied. "While other students went to parties, I practiced. While they slept, I studied music theory. I knew this was my one chance to build a life around music." Harold paused to eat more of his dinner. Marcus waited patiently for him to continue. "After graduation, I got a job with a small orchestra in Ohio," Harold said. "The pay was terrible, but I was making music for a living. It felt like a miracle." "How did you end up in Chicago?" Marcus asked. "I met Elena," Harold said, and his whole face lit up. She was playing violin with the same orchestra. The first time I heard her play, I knew I was listening to someone special. Marcus could hear the love in Harold's voice when he talked about his wife. Elena and I started playing together outside of the orchestra, Harold continued. We gave small concerts, played at weddings, taught lessons. We were building a life together through music. When did you join the Chicago Symphony? Marcus asked. In 1978, Harold said proudly. The principal pianist was retiring and they held auditions. Elena and I had been married for 3 years by then. When I got the job, we felt like we had finally made it. Harold's eyes sparkled as he remembered those early days. The Chicago Symphony was like a dream come true. I got to play the greatest music ever written with some of the finest musicians in the world. What was your favorite piece to play? Marcus asked. Harold thought for a moment. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, he said. The piece I played for you tonight. Elena used to say I played it like I had written it myself. Marcus remembered the incredible performance he had just witnessed. You certainly did tonight. Elena and I also started teaching at the conservatory, Harold continued. We loved working with young musicians. There's something magical about watching a student discover what they're truly capable of. Did you ever record albums? Marcus asked. Harold nodded. Several. The symphony recorded many concerts, and Elena and I made a few albums together. They were never big sellers, but we were proud of them. Marcus made a mental note to find those recordings online. He wanted to hear more of Harold's music. We also traveled quite a bit, Harold said. The symphony went on tours to Europe and Asia. Elena and I gave concerts in small towns across America. We wanted to bring classical music to places where people might not otherwise hear it. That sounds like a wonderful life, Marcus said. It was, Harold agreed. For 45 years, I woke up every day excited to make music. Not many people get to say that about their work. Harold's expression grew sad again. When Elena got sick, I had to cut back on my performance schedule to take care of her. Eventually, I had to retire early to be with her full-time. The symphony must have been sorry to lose you, Marcus said. They were very kind, Harold replied. They gave me a small pension and held a retirement concert in my honor. But once you're gone from that world, people forget about you quickly. There's always new talent coming up. Marcus thought about how easily people could be forgotten, even after a lifetime of important work. After Elena died, I tried to reconnect with some of my old colleagues, Harold said, but most of them have their own problems. The music world doesn't pay very well for most people. Everyone is struggling. Harold finished the last of his dinner and set down his fork. I'm sorry to talk so much about myself, he said. It's been a long time since anyone wanted to hear these stories. Don't apologize, Marcus said firmly. Your life has been extraordinary. You've dedicated yourself to something beautiful and important. That's more than most people can say. Marcus signaled the waiter for coffee. He had more questions, and he was starting to form a real plan for how he could help Harold. Tell me, Marcus said, if you could design the perfect music program for young people, what would it look like? Harold's eyes lit up again. This was clearly something he had thought about before. It would combine the highest level of musical training with real-world experience. Harold said immediately. Too many music schools focus only on technique. Students learn to play the notes perfectly, but they don't learn to touch people's hearts. Marcus leaned forward with interest. What else? It would serve students who couldn't otherwise afford top-quality instruction, Harold continued. Talent exists everywhere, but opportunity doesn't. A lot of potential musicians never get the chance I got. That sounds exactly like what I had in mind, Marcus said with a smile. Harold looked at him with surprise. You're serious about this foundation idea? Completely serious, Marcus replied. And I think you just described our mission statement. Over the next 2 hours, Marcus and Harold talked about the Music Foundation idea in detail. Marcus pulled out his phone and started taking notes. The more they discussed it, the more excited both men became. We would need a building with good acoustics, Harold said. Somewhere students could practice without disturbing neighbors. And we'd need quality instruments that students could use. Marcus nodded and wrote everything down. What about teachers? I know many excellent musicians who are struggling to find steady work, Harold replied. Good teachers who would love the chance to work with dedicated students. How many students could we serve? Marcus asked. Harold thought carefully. If we started small, maybe 20 students in the first year. We could offer individual lessons, group classes, and ensemble playing. As we grew, we could serve more. Marcus did some quick math in his head. Even a high-quality program would cost far less than he spent on his car collection. What would you look for in students? Marcus asked. Talent, of course, Harold said, but also dedication and a real love for music. Some of the best musicians I've known didn't start with the most natural ability. They succeeded because they cared deeply about music. Marcus could see Harold's passion growing as they talked. This man had been forced into retirement, but he clearly wasn't ready to stop sharing his knowledge. There's one more thing, Harold said quietly. I'd want to make sure we served students from all backgrounds. Rich kids can already get good music lessons. We should focus on students who have talent but not opportunity. This idea touched Marcus deeply. He thought about his own privileged childhood, when his parents could afford to give him any opportunity he wanted. Harold was talking about giving that same chance to kids who didn't have wealthy parents. I love that idea, Marcus said. How would we find those students? Partner with public schools, Harold suggested. Many school music programs are underfunded, but the teachers know which students have real potential. We could offer scholarships to the most promising students. Marcus was writing as fast as he could. This conversation was giving him more purpose than he had felt in years. When could we start? Marcus asked. Harold looked surprised. You really want to do this? I've never wanted to do anything more, Marcus replied honestly. For the first time in my life, I have a chance to use my money for something that actually matters. Harold studied Marcus's face carefully. What changed your mind about me? Marcus set down his pen and thought about the question. Honestly, you did. When I heard you play tonight, I realized that I've been thinking about success all wrong. What do you mean? Harold asked. I thought success meant making money and buying expensive things, Marcus explained. But you showed me something different. You showed me what it looks like to dedicate your life to something beautiful and meaningful. Marcus looked around the expensive restaurant. I've eaten in places like this 1,000 times, but I've never experienced anything as rich as your music tonight. Harold smiled gently. Music has always been my wealth. And now I want to help you share that wealth with others, Marcus said. But I need you to know something. This isn't charity. I'm not offering you this job because I feel sorry for you. Harold raised his eyebrows. Why then? Because you're exactly the person I've been looking for, Marcus said. I've wanted to do something meaningful with my money for years, but I didn't know how. You have the knowledge and experience I need. This would be a true partnership. Harold was quiet for a moment. I haven't had a partner since Elena died, he said softly. Well, you'd have one again, Marcus replied. A business partner this time, but a partner nonetheless. Harold smiled for the first time all evening. Tell me more about your idea. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Harold some pictures. I own a building downtown that I've been trying to figure out what to do with. It used to be a small concert hall in the 1920s. Harold looked at the photos with interest. The building was beautiful, with high ceilings and elegant architecture. The acoustics are probably wonderful, Harold said. These old performance spaces were built to carry sound naturally. Would it work for a music school? Marcus asked. It would be perfect, Harold replied. We could restore the main hall for student concerts and master classes. The smaller rooms could be converted into practice studios and classrooms. Marcus felt a surge of excitement. How long would it take to get something like this running? Harold thought carefully. If we had the funding and worked quickly, we could probably start accepting students within 6 months. It would take time to hire teachers, buy instruments, and set up the programs. What would you need to live on while we're getting started? Marcus asked. Harold looked uncomfortable. I don't want to take advantage of your generosity. You're not, Marcus said firmly. You'd be working full-time to build this program. Of course you deserve a salary and a place to live. Marcus had another idea. Actually, there's an apartment above the concert hall building. It's been empty for years, but it could be fixed up nicely. Would you be interested in living there? Harold's eyes widened. The idea of having a real home again seemed almost too good to believe. I could walk to work every day, Harold said quietly, and I could practice piano whenever I wanted without bothering neighbors. So you're interested? Marcus asked hopefully. Harold was quiet for a long moment. Marcus could see him thinking through all the possibilities and challenges. There's something you should know, Harold said finally. I'm 73 years old. I might only be able to do this for a few years before my health starts to decline. Then we'd better get started right away, Marcus replied. And we'll plan for you to train other people to carry on the work. Harold smiled at Marcus's practical approach to the problem. There's one more thing, Harold said. I want to make sure we do this right. Not just quickly, but right. Music education is too important to treat carelessly. Absolutely, Marcus agreed. What would doing it right look like? We take time to plan carefully, Harold said. We hire the best teachers we can find. We create a program that really serves students, not just something that looks good to donors. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. I want this to be something we're both proud of 20 years from now. Harold extended his hand across the table. Then I accept your offer, partner. Marcus shook Harold's hand firmly. Partner, he repeated. As they shook hands, both men felt something they hadn't experienced in a long time. Harold felt hope and purpose returning to his life. Marcus felt like he was finally about to do something that mattered. There's one last thing, Harold said with a small smile. I'm going to need a piano to practice on while we're setting everything up. Marcus laughed. I think I can afford a piano. Nothing too fancy, Harold said quickly. Just something with good action and decent sound. Harold, Marcus said with a grin, I think our definitions of too fancy might be very different. For the first time since Elena died, Harold felt like he was part of something bigger than his own grief and struggle. And for the first time in his adult life, Marcus felt like his money was going to create something beautiful instead of just buying things he didn't need. Outside the restaurant window, it was starting to rain. But inside, two men who had been strangers an hour ago were planning something that would change both their lives forever. 6 months later, Harold stood in the main hall of the Wellington Cultural Foundation, watching 20 young musicians prepare for their first student concert. The old concert hall had been beautifully restored, with warm lighting and rich wood panels that made the space feel both elegant and welcoming. The sound of students tuning their instruments filled the air. Harold smiled as he listened to the familiar chaos that happened before every performance. Some things never changed, no matter how fancy the concert hall. Mr. Martinez, called out Maria, a 12-year-old violinist from the south side of Chicago. I'm nervous about my solo tonight. Harold walked over to Maria and knelt down beside her. Tell me what you're nervous about, he said gently. What if I make a mistake? Maria asked. What if I forget the music? Harold remembered asking his own teacher the same question many years ago. Maria, do you love this piece of music? The girl nodded enthusiastically. It's beautiful. It makes me think of birds flying. Then just think about those birds when you play, Harold said. Don't worry about the notes. Think about what the music means to you and your fingers will remember what to do. Maria smiled and went back to practicing. Harold watched her for a moment, remembering how Elena used to give the same advice to her students. She's gotten so much better since she started here, said Jennifer Wu, one of the foundation's violin teachers. Jennifer had been struggling to find steady work when Harold hired her. Now she taught 15 students and had a waiting list of families who wanted lessons. Maria has talent and heart, Harold replied. That's a powerful combination. Harold looked around the hall at the other students. There was David, a 16-year-old pianist whose family had immigrated from Guatemala. His parents worked 3 jobs between them but had insisted on finding a way to pay for music lessons when they saw how much David loved the piano. Near the back of the hall, Carmen was helping younger students with their sheet music. Carmen was 19 and had been one of Harold's first students at the foundation. She had started as a student and was now working as a teaching assistant while studying music education at the local college. 5 minutes until we start, announced Marcus, who was standing near the entrance greeting parents and families. Harold had to smile when he looked at Marcus. The businessman had thrown himself into the foundation work with the same energy he had once used to build his company. He had learned to read music and was even taking piano lessons from Harold twice a week. Nervous? Marcus asked as he walked over to Harold. Always, before a student concert, Harold admitted. I want them all to do well. They will, Marcus said confidently. You've prepared them beautifully. Harold looked out at the audience that was starting to fill the hall. Most of the families looked like they didn't often attend classical music concerts. Many parents were still wearing their work clothes because they had come straight from their jobs. But their faces showed pride and excitement as they watched their children prepare to perform. Places, everyone, Harold called out. The students quickly took their seats or moved to their performance positions. Harold walked to the front of the hall to address the audience. "Welcome to the Wellington Cultural Foundation," he said. 6 months ago, this building was empty, and these young musicians had never met each other. Tonight, you'll hear what happens when talented young people get the chance to learn from excellent teachers. He paused and looked at the students. But more than that, you'll hear what happens when music brings people together. These students don't just play music together. They've become a family. Harold introduced the first piece, a simple but beautiful arrangement of a folk song that all the students played together. As the music began, Harold felt the same thrill he had always felt when hearing young musicians perform. The concert continued with solo pieces and small ensemble performances. Maria played her violin solo without a single mistake, her face glowing with concentration and joy. David performed a complex piano piece that brought tears to his parents' eyes. Carmen conducted a group of younger students in a piece they had arranged themselves. Between pieces, Harold noticed that the young man who had originally recorded his restaurant performance was in the audience. The video of Harold playing Chopin had been viewed over 2 million times online and had led to several newspaper articles about the foundation. Harold had been surprised by all the attention, but Marcus had explained that the story touched people because it showed how circumstances could change quickly for anyone. Many people had donated money to the foundation after hearing Harold's story. "The final piece tonight," Harold announced, "will be performed by our full ensemble, with me joining them on piano." This was something new. Harold usually didn't perform with the students, preferring to let them have the spotlight, but Marcus had convinced him that the audience would love to hear the teacher and students play together. Harold sat down at the beautiful new Steinway piano that Marcus had bought for the foundation. It was the finest instrument Harold had played since he sold his own piano years ago. The piece was Pachelbel's Canon, arranged so that students of different skill levels could all participate. As Harold began the opening piano part, he thought about how much his life had changed. 6 months ago, he had been sleeping in his car and wondering where his next meal would come from. Tonight, he was surrounded by 20 young musicians who looked up to him as their teacher and mentor. The music built as each section of the ensemble joined in. The violins entered with the familiar melody, followed by the cellos and then the flutes. Harold's piano provided the foundation that held everything together. As they played, Harold looked out at the audience. Parents were smiling and some were crying with pride. Marcus stood at the back of the hall, filming the performance on his phone. Harold could see that Marcus was crying too. When the piece ended, the audience erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. The students stood and took their bows, grinning with excitement and accomplishment. After the concert, families gathered in the lobby for refreshments. Harold moved through the crowd, talking with parents and students. Everyone wanted to thank him for what he had given their children. "Mr. Martinez," said David's mother in heavily accented English. "David is a different boy since he starts here. He practices every day and talks about music always." "David has a gift," Harold replied. "We're just helping him discover what he can do with it." Maria's father, a construction worker who had taken time off work to attend the concert, shook Harold's hand firmly. "Thank you for believing in our daughter," he said. "She talks about you like you're her grandfather." These conversations meant more to Harold than any review he had ever received as a professional musician. He was seeing firsthand how music could change young people's lives. Later that evening, after all the families had gone home, Harold and Marcus sat in the empty concert hall. The students had helped clean up and the building was quiet now. "So," Marcus said, "how does it feel?" Harold thought for a moment. "Like I've found my purpose again," he said. "Elena always said that music was meant to be passed on, not kept to yourself. I feel like I'm finally doing that in the way she would have wanted." Marcus nodded. "The foundation has already gotten applications from 50 more students. We're going to need to expand." "Good problems to have," Harold replied. Marcus looked around the beautiful hall. "You know, 6 months ago I thought success meant having the most expensive things. Now I think success means creating something that will outlast you." Harold smiled. "These students will teach other students someday. The music will keep going long after we're both gone." "Speaking of which," Marcus said, "I have some news. The Chicago Symphony wants to invite you to guest conduct their educational concert series next year." Harold looked surprised. "Really?" "They heard about what we're doing here," Marcus explained. They want you to bring some of our students to perform with the youth orchestra. Harold felt a warmth in his chest. It would be wonderful to work with his old orchestra again, and even better to give his students that opportunity. There's something else, Marcus continued. That recording company that contacted us last week? They want to make an album of our students performing classical pieces arranged for young musicians. Harold shook his head in amazement. 6 months ago I was asking for food. Now recording companies want to work with us. It's not just about you anymore, Marcus said. It's about what we've built together. This place, these students, these teachers, it's becoming something important. Harold stood up and walked to the piano. He played a few quiet notes, just enjoying the sound of the beautiful instrument. You know what I'm most proud of? Harold said. What's that? Marcus asked. Maria told me yesterday that she wants to be a music teacher when she grows up, Harold said. She wants to teach kids like herself. That's when you know the music will really continue. Marcus joined Harold at the piano. Play something, he said. Just for us. Harold began playing the same Chopin piece he had performed at the restaurant 6 months ago. But tonight it sounded different. The sadness was still there, but it was mixed with hope and gratitude. As Harold played, Marcus thought about how one evening had changed both their lives completely. Harold had lost everything and found it again.